Chapter 716. Letter 1. Torrens' entire body turned calm upon saying the last words, his eyes growing still, and the black veins covering his body slowly starting to diminish. But even then, the madness within his gaze was all too clear. The power, it had already consumed him. But this wasn't something that Emmett hadn't expected, for he too had been consumed by the very same power. Staring at Torren, his lips slowly parted. When do you think hell begins? Emmett took a step forward, and Torren's eyes rippled. He swiped his hand. Bang! Several pillars collapsed, but... Quote. Emmett remained standing. I am but a mere mirage of who I once was. I've already become someone else. Whatever you try, you won't be able to do a single thing to me. His cold voice echoed across the empty space as he took another step forward. Torren remained where he was. He couldn't move. He couldn't allow himself to move. Stepping back would mean that he feared the man before him. He feared no one. There was no one who could make him feel fear. You've still not answered me. Emmett's cold voice echoed across the hall once more. When do you think hell begins? It was just a simple question, but listening to it, Torren didn't know how to answer. Hell, he didn't even believe in hell. But he still answered, if there is a hell, I'm already living in it. Quote. Emmett smiled, his eyes looking down on Torren. He seemed amused by the answer as he grew closer to him. What's so funny? Quote. I just find it funny how you'd think what you've gone through is hell. Don't you think your life has been so much better than Noel's? If hell existed, I'm sure he's the one who has gone through it. He should be thankful for that. Torren shook his head. Quote. I would rather walk into hell than carry the burden of lifting those up from the very hell that traps them. Is that so? Emmett stopped. He stood right before Torren. The two locked eyes with each other. The room grew tense. And then, hell begins the moment the world grants you the vision to see all that you could have done, should have done, and would have done, but couldn't do, didn't have time to do, or had to wait a long time to do. The temperature dropped, and Emmett's eyes grew hollow as he stared at Torren. Quote. That is the hell that I've experienced. His soft words quietly reached Torren as his hand raised. To see all the endless possibilities. All the possible ways that I could die. That Noel dies. That the world ends. To see the suffering of those I love etched into futures I cannot determine or have no idea how to change. That is true hell. Torren wanted to swat the hand away, but he knew it was impossible. Emmett wasn't actually here, but it felt like he was. And soon, his hand pressed against his forehead. Emmett's soft voice echoed once more. You want to experience what I experienced? For the last time. Quote. Be my guest, but don't lose yourself in it. Darkness took over Torren's vision after that. The days that followed the Emperor's death were chaotic. It began with public unrest, followed by the sudden mobilization of several noble houses, forming alliances and throwing their support behind select potential successors. The movements were all done secretly, but the change was noticeable. Several prominent successors vied for the throne, each aggressively courting the most influential noble houses they could secure. Aoife was one of the successors, but she was strangely quiet. Not that it mattered, for at least until the Emperor and the Prince's funeral, the fight for the throne had to be put on pause. The succession battle hadn't begun yet, but the scent of gunpowder already hung heavy in the air. I bet the other empires are having a field day. Looking at the report in my hand, I hopped off my carriage and stretched. Looking at the estate up ahead and seeing numerous carriages parked, I understood what was happening, and I secretly groaned inside. However, I didn't show my frustration as I calmly walked toward the estate. Stop right there. But of course, getting into my own house wasn't going to be easy. Several people stopped me right before I could enter. Standing before several knights in silver armor was a man dressed rather fancily, his thick mustache that curled at the ends the most prominent feature of his. I stopped then. You are? I'm an envoy from Prince Julius Romulus Megrail. I'm here to formally invite you. Not interested. Clank, clank. Several blades and weapons were pointed at me. I stopped and looked at them, catching a glimpse of my own reflection within the polished gleam of the weapons. Look here, the envoy spoke, his eyes narrowing and his tone becoming even more arrogant. Quote. I don't think you're fully aware of your current position. You're but a mere viscount while the prince is of the Megrail bloodline. If he calls for you, then, like I said, not interested. How many times did I have to tell this guy before he got the message? I didn't even know who this prince was. And since I didn't know, he was most likely a bastard child. If I were to ally myself with someone, it'd have to be with the princess, not some bastard child. Now, if you would excuse me. I closed my eyes and opened them up again. In that moment, the faces of everyone present changed. Huh, quote. Who are you? What's going on? I smiled at them. Hello, I'm an attendant for the household. I'm trying to get in, if you would please excuse me. I pushed myself through. None of them complained. They all just looked dazed and confused. I silently smirked to myself. This new skill does sure come in handy. Eye of Existence. As expected of a primordial rank bone. The skill that I received was a good one. Coming into the estate, I let out a large breath. The insides were rather cool, but everything was still relatively empty. Staring at the place, I felt a certain pang inside my chest. I wonder if Noel is doing okay. I still hadn't heard from him. However, I knew that the chances of him coming back were slim. The only thing I hoped for was his safety. Pressing my lips together, I looked around the place before eventually making my way towards his office. I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to do next, but if I search through Noel's office, I'm bound to find something. And so I did. I climbed the long flight of stairs to the second floor and made my way toward his office. Stopping in front of the large wooden door at the end of the corridor, I raised my hand to knock, only to pause. Right, quote. He was no longer here. I sighed before reaching for the handle and opening the door. Clank. The office was exactly the same. It was clean, and everything was in place. I looked around the place before my gaze paused at his desk. It was there that I saw a letter neatly tucked under one of the books on the desk, and I couldn't help but smile at the sight of it. As expected, you did leave something behind after all. It would have been so much easier had he just told me before leaving, but Noel had always been like this. I was used to his behavior. In hindsight, he probably took this from me. I shook my head before taking the letter and opening it. I read the first sentence. And the smile was wiped away from my face. To the brother who forgot how to fall. I had to take a small pause. What is this? For some reason, I didn't want to read any further. But even though my mind said otherwise, my eyes didn't listen. They traced down the first words. Ever since our parents' death. I know you were never allowed to fall. No, you never allowed yourself to fall. You were forced to grow up faster. You took the blame, even when it wasn't yours. You were the one who always knew where to go. Even when you yourself were lost. My hands shook. Quote. What is this nonsense? Why is he writing this? I looked behind the letter, but there was nothing else written. I bit my lip. I really didn't want to read more. And yet, I know you've changed. It was as if Noel's voice whispered into my ears. You're not the same brother I used to know. It was soft, but you're still my brother. Warm. They called you strong. And comforting. But I see the truth. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were just trying to keep us alive. And no one knows the price you paid for that. You never cried. You never complained. You protected me, regardless of the cost. I felt breathless. Why was he doing this? Why now? Somewhere along the way, your silence became your strength. But I see you. I always see you. I see the exhaustion behind your resilience. You give and give, without ever asking for anything in return. You show up, even when your own heart is breaking. You stay quiet, not because you don't feel, but because you feel too much. The words seemed to strain at this point. I could see it. I could feel it. Noel's struggle as he wrote this. Why was he writing something like this? No, I could tell why. This letter. It was a farewell letter. I covered my mouth. Right. It's not as if I didn't expect this. My chest started to sting. But I continued to read. Even as my heart stung, and my eyes started to blur. So hear this. I know all about the thing that you did in the mirror dimension. About how you didn't listen to my request. But you know what's funny? I never really got mad. Even the strongest deserve gentleness. You don't always have to be the anchor. You're allowed to be held, too. I can't be there for you. At least not yet, but there might be a time when the two of us can be together once again. Not as Mortem and Oricleus. Not as Aldrich and Julian. But truly, as Emmett and Noel. As big brother and little brother. As family. The letter ended there. Quote. I stood in silence like that. In a way, it was ironic. Before, I wanted the letter to end fast. I wanted it to be quick. And yet, staring at it in my hands, I couldn't help but reread it over and over again. It was short. This letter. It was way too short. I covered my mouth and sat down, feeling something cover my eyes. Staring at the window, towards the sight Noel had grown used to staring at. I took a deep and long breath. Forgot how to fall, huh? I shook my head. If only it were true. Chapter 717, Letter 2. I didn't know how long I remained seated. I just allowed the silence to take over my thoughts and surroundings, basking in it for as long as I possibly could. Silence always had different meanings to me. At some points, silence signified loneliness. It signified the lack of voices around me. But after a certain point, silence became something else for me. It became a sign of peace. With all the chaos and everything that had been happening around me, the rare moments of silence became the rare moments of peace. But, I wonder what it is I'm feeling right now. Was this silence loneliness? Or was this silence peace? I couldn't tell. However, it felt like a mix of both. Closing my eyes and letting the darkness take over my vision, I took several deep breaths in order to calm myself down before opening my eyes again and staring at the letter in my hands. I have no idea what you've planned, but I know that you're probably going to be away for a very long time. It wasn't like I didn't see it coming. I was ready for it. But the letter caught me off guard. It was as if I had suddenly been sucker punched by him. How annoying. Finally, a smile cracked my features. I carefully folded the letter and put it in my ring. I planned on framing it later. I wiped my face a couple of times before looking around me. Now that Noel was gone, I needed to think of a way to excuse his absence. The logical thing to do was to pretend that he was gone on a long trip. However, that wouldn't really be believable considering the current situation with the Evanis family. In that case, he either died or got injured. I frowned before thinking about the previous assassination attempt. That could work. The excuse of him being injured by the assassination attempt could work. At least in the short term. I knew that I wouldn't be able to keep up the excuse for very long. Not that it mattered. There were so many things that I needed to worry about at the moment. Now that my identity has been exposed, it wouldn't be strange for those of the inverted sky to come find me. And they're not just going to send people at the same level as me. Atlas, he could be the one to directly find me. And even if it isn't him, it might be the other seats. This part worried me. While I was strong, I was still nowhere near strong enough to not worry about them. If they truly did come, then there'd be nothing I'd be able to do. Unless, Noel already knew this in advance and prepared something for this situation. This seemed like a plausible situation. There was no way that Noel wouldn't think that something like this would happen. Well, I can worry about this later. Although it's important, there are still a couple of more pressing matters that I need to take care of. I looked around Noel's desk before grabbing a calendar. Taking the fountain pen that rested not far from me, I circled 2 dates. Emperor funeral, and rite of arms. In 2 days' time, the emperor's and the prince's funerals were going to start. Those days were going to be extremely important. Not only would those days mark the start of the succession battle, but they would also mark the last day of peace within the Nurzansifa Empire. I was almost certain that the other empires were going to secretly help the other candidates in the fight for the throne. This was going to be a long and bloody war. One that I needed to be extremely careful of. The rite is supposed to happen in a week's time, but it might get pushed by a few days. I still need to find some extra people for help. So far, I've got a couple of people in mind. I was a little bit worried about the rite. However, I was also quite confident in winning it. I just needed to be careful since there was a high chance some external forces could interfere in the matter. In particular, the other empires. I was really worried about this part. But it's not like they will send a monarch in the fight. That would be overkill. My best guess is that they might send a quasi-monarch in the fight. Someone who is on the verge of becoming a monarch. That will be their trump card. I need to think about a way to handle that. There was not only that, but I also needed to carefully study the Evanis forces. By now, everyone was aware that what the Evanis household displayed was far from their real force. Our financial power was staggering, and so were our troops. But, I knew nothing of the full extent of it. That was why I planned on finding out about it now. But where exactly did he leave those files? I tapped around the desk, flipping over several dozen papers that were neatly stacked on each side of the desk. There were quite a lot of them, and just looking at them gave me a massive headache. No, wait, I paused after a moment. In hindsight, there was no way Noel would leave such sensitive files out in the open. They had to be in a safe place. I drummed my finger over the table before turning around and staring at the massive bookshelf behind me. Can it be? If there was one thing that I was aware of about Noel, it was that he had always loved spy movies when young. He especially loved things like secret rooms and stuff. And if my guesses weren't wrong. Click. Pulling one of the books back, a faint clicking sound echoed, and the library moved apart, giving way to a small door. One that appeared to be password protected. Quote. I didn't even say a thing. Even after so many years, he really hasn't changed. I felt both happy and sad. Of all the things that didn't change. Never mind. I looked at the password and paused. Knowing my brother well, I inputted a code into the keypad that was constructed using runes, and the door opened a few seconds later. Quote. My date of birth. As expected, Noel was really predictable with regards to stuff like this. A small flight of stairs greeted my sight the moment the door opened, and as I looked down, the lights on the side of the walls lit up and a room soon appeared before me. The moment I crossed into the room, I paused. Quote. There were no words that truly captured the place. It wasn't massive, but it was certainly large, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts placed side by side. Stone walls enclosed the space, and tall wooden pillars rose at intervals, supporting the ceiling above. Neatly arranged desks filled the room, all containing files and documents that were neatly arranged together. Massive libraries stood by the sides of the walls at the back, all containing numerous books and files that felt like they would take forever to read. The air felt rather fresh, and besides the smell of stone that lingered around the area, the smell of the place wasn't bad. Quote. He really didn't hold back when making this place. Taking in the sight before me for the next several seconds, I eventually moved towards the desks. There were 5 in total, and each one of them had a label on it. This felt a little surprising, but then I realized something. He probably left them for me. The first table said, History. The second table said, Evanus Household, Territory, and Worth. The third table said, Empires and their layout. The fourth table said, The 4 organizations, layout, seats, and routes. And the fifth table said, Everything I know about the outer beings. Quote. Staring at the numerous files and papers on each table, and then the labels, my heart skipped a beat. This was massive. Quote. It had been a couple of days since the death of her father and brother. And yet, it still felt as though everything had happened just a few minutes ago. The haunting images lingered in her mind, preventing her from getting any sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, they returned. She'd snap them open again, heart pounding, as if that alone could keep them at bay. Aoife's gaze was blank. Her steps were slow. Before she knew it, she found herself in front of a certain room. It was her brother's room. Quote. Her gaze wandered over the room before she reached for it and opened it. Creak. The door creaked open, and his room came into view. It was finely decorated. It wasn't much different from hers, besides the massive desk that sat by the window. On it sat several bottles of medicine, neatly arranged beside picture frames. Inside them were photos of her and him. Her heart clenched as she moved towards the desk. This was the first time she had been to his desk. Sitting in his seat, she smelled his familiar scent. The one of lavender. Her lips trembled, but no tears came out. Her tears. They had all dried up. But only the tears. The pain hadn't. In fact, it only grew stronger with each second that she passed in the room, feeling as though it was trying to rip her chest apart. This was the first time she had ever felt this much pain at once. It made her feel numb to everything. And yet, despite knowing it was bad, she couldn't stop herself. She reached for her brother's drawers and looked through all of his stuff. The more she sifted through his things, the deeper the ache grew. Especially when she found the empty medicine bottles. So many of them, dried blood hidden around file edges. Crumpled papers scattered across the desk. Each one felt like a quiet reminder of just how much pain he lived in every day. She felt her heart ache even more at the realization, and as she looked through another drawer and she took out another paper, Aoife paused. Her hollow, numb gaze wavered as it landed on the paper, a faint flicker of something breaking through the emptiness. Javink Award. Vote. Aoife K. Megrail. W. What? Chapter 718, Funeral 1. That's this. Aoife's hand shook as she stared at the paper in front of her. She looked at it again, and seeing that she wasn't seeing wrong, her expression started to change. This doesn't make sense. He voted for me, but wasn't it Julian who voted for me? Wait, Since he has it here, it must mean that he didn't send it. Aoife relaxed after her thoughts paused there. Yes, this makes sense. He tried to send it, but decided not to in the end. She took another breath and turned the paper around. But that was when she saw it. The words written on the back. To my dear sister, even if no one votes for you, I will. Single quote. Even if you might never find out, just know that this was the only vote you received. Her hand shook, and her expression started to change. This doesn't make sense. She was sure that Julian had been the one to vote for her. Unless, quote. He lied to me. Thinking back, this did sound like something Julian would do. He had never been the nicest of guys in the past. He was selfish. He was apathetic. He lied to me. He has to have lied to me. He lied. He lied. He lied. He lied. He lied. He lied. Aoife's thoughts started to spiral. They spiraled in a way that she felt she couldn't control. Perhaps because of everything that had happened to her recently, her mind wasn't in the right state to properly process the situation. She needed an outlet to vent, and she found the perfect one. Quote. He lied to me. Her hand slowly squeezed the vote in her hand, crumbling it in her palm as her eyes flickered. Ook. But it was also in that moment that her mind suddenly throbbed. Aoife let out a short groan as she dropped the vote and went on to clutch her head. He lied. 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 Her own voice continued to whisper loudly in her mind as her eyes started to turn bloodshot. She didn't know what was going on. What even is happening? Her eyes turned even more bloodshot as her fingers curled, trying to grasp the marble floor beneath her. And just as the pain was starting to grow even fiercer than before, her vision blanked. The world around her seemed to shift, pulsing in weird ways as she found herself hovering before a certain figure. He stood before her. He looked a little older, but that haughty and arrogant look of his, Aoife could distinctly remember. Her chest burned at the sight of him. It burned, with something that was akin to resentment and anger. Kill. I need to kill him. Her hand slowly clenched as his haughty gaze fell on her. Their eyes met, and Aoife's expression distorted. But just as the tension reached its breaking point, Aoife's vision suddenly narrowed, as if she were being yanked out of a tunnel. The next thing she knew, she was stumbling backward, collapsing onto the floor. Cough. Cough. Aoife started to cough violently, feeling her hair attached to her forehead. Her chest rose and fell unevenly as she desperately tried to gasp for air. And then, what in the world was that? Aoife struggled to comprehend the situation. That vision, those boiling emotions, what in the world was happening? Taking several more breaths, Aoife slowly turned her attention towards the glass plane that rested next to Gail's bed, positioned at an angle. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in that moment. Her hair was disheveled, her face drained of color, and both her clothes and hair clung to her sweat-soaked skin. Is that me? Aoife had already been aware of the fact that she looked horrible. She hadn't eaten for days and had hardly gotten much sleep. But she didn't know it was to this extent. She was just prepared to stand up when. You need to kill him. A certain voice whispered in the air. Who? Aoife's head flicked upwards, towards the source of the noise, but nothing. There was no one else present in the room. Who said that? Who was here? Aoife tried to stand up, but found herself completely drained of energy. Single quote. He is not someone who should be kept. You need to kill him before it's too late. Quote. Exclamation mark question mark quote. The voice whispered again, and Aoife's body tensed. I said, who is it? Where are you? Show yourself. Aoife's voice grew louder as she looked around. However, she still couldn't see or sense anyone. It was just as she was about to stand up to look for the voice that her gaze fell on the mirror. In that moment, she froze. Quote. Quote. All thoughts disappeared from her mind as she stared at her own reflection. Or more precisely, the figure clinging to her back, arms wrapped tightly around her neck, head resting beside her shoulder, lips curled into a quiet, unsettling smile. You need to kill him before it's too late. All of it is his fault. He's the one who did it. He's the killer of your father and brother. Aoife's lips trembled, not because of the words, but because of the figure that appeared. She looked older, but that was certainly herself. What are you waiting for? The voice whispered closer to her ears. Aoife's lips trembled further, and her eyes shook. Single quote. Get rid of him. Get rid of the cancer that is slowly growing next to you. Wah, what was happening to her? Quote. There's so much stuff that I need to look through. I don't think I'll be able to get through everything in a day, let alone a month. The reality of just how many things were present before me started to sink in after the initial excitement died down. Seeing just how many files were in front of me, I knew that it was impossible for me to go through them quickly. To make matters worse, I really wanted to read each and every section. However, I knew that I had to prioritize things based on the current situation. As such, the first thing that I did was go to the Evanis household section. This was probably the one that I wanted to look at. The least, but considering everything that was happening, it was the most important one for me. It's also not like I don't have time to check the others later. I flipped through the first file. Financials. My eyes lit up. Single quote. Maybe not everything is interesting. I licked my lips and looked through the financial data. The layout was quite well done. It was separated into different sections. From the income generated from taxes, income generated from trade, income generated from the gold mine, income gained from conflicts, and so on. The file had everything, including the final sum at the end, as I sucked in a cold breath. Holy shit, the number of zeros made my head spin. So much. The amount of income that the territory managed was simply astronomical. It was something that even put all of my savings to shame. If I take into account everything that I have, including the solas that I kept from the mirror dimension in case I'd have to go back there, I have a total of around 200 million rand. That was a lot of money. And yet, it was still nothing compared to what the household made. Is this just unique to our household, or are the other households the same? It suddenly started to make sense why Aoife and the others cared little about money. This was simply ridiculous. Or at least, this was what I thought until I saw the expenses list. Never mind. That number was also astronomical. I guess running such a large territory isn't cheap. A sharp pang hit my chest the moment I saw the numbers. My first instinct was clear: increase taxes, cut spending. But I knew that path would ignite a storm of backlash, so I forced the thought aside. I think it's best if I don't touch this stuff. Noel has already arranged everything accordingly. He knows about this more than I. I started to look through the other files. Forces of the Evanis household. Yet again, I sucked in a breath of cold air. It turned out that the Evanis household had quite the force under its command. We had a total of 20,000 soldiers under our command. Of the number that were above Tier 5, there were only 200, each of which were respectively leader of their own unit. There were 2 Tier 7s and 1 Tier 8. This is a lot more than I expected. This made me think about the upcoming right. Single quote. If possible, I can probably use them. But at the same time, I shook my head. A lot of these forces were stationed far away and were kept secret. It was still not time to display the full force of the Evanis household. I could still handle things without their help. However, it felt more reassuring to know that I had backup like this. What else? I started to look through all the other files related to the Evanis household. I immersed myself in learning all about the ins and outs of the household. From hidden allies, to people that I needed to watch out for, too. Wait, these are our territories. It turns out that the Evanis household was even bigger than previously anticipated. There were several smaller territories that were officially baronies, but were in fact secretly owned by the Evanis household. The scariest aspect of it all was that each territory was strategically placed in areas where special targets of interest were located. Staring at the map and seeing all the red circles, I couldn't help but cover my mouth. Just how much did you plan advance, Noel? I leaned back into the chair while musing over the entire situation. But then, feeling a small vibration over my communication device, I took it out and read the message. My expression changed subtly. Oh, shit. I stood up from my seat and went out of the room. I needed to go quickly. I had been so immersed in my studies that I had completely lost track of time. I was about to miss the Emperor's funeral. Chapter 719, Funeral 2. Quote. Exclamation mark question mark quote. I was supposed to leave at least a day in advance in order to get to Bremer. However, with everything that had happened, I ended up going the same day that the funeral was being held. Are you kidding me? You want to rob me blind? Do you know who I am? No, and I don't care. Pay up or we're not opening up the portal. Exclamation mark quote. I clenched my teeth and glared at the man in front of me. In the end, albeit unwillingly, I ended up handing over 200,000 rand. I felt my stomach twist as I handed the man the money, but I had no choice. This was the price I had to pay in order to not be late. Thankfully, there's a gate not far from our territory. The Evanis household didn't have a gate set up. This was mainly due to the astronomical price that it took to set one up, and with Noel wanting to keep the finances private, he never established one. As a result, I had no choice but to run to a nearby territory and use their gate. It wasn't so hard, was it? Taking the money, the man gave me a look before turning around and motioning the workers to set up the gate. I held myself from cursing at him. Then, swoosh, the surroundings swirled as the portal formed. My clothes and hair fluttered as I stared at the massive gate in front of me. Maybe I should think about setting one up. Even though it cost a lot of money to make, it also generated a lot. Not only that, but it made traveling easier. I was starting to get tired of carriages. And it's not like we have to hold our financial power back any longer. I had been holding and saving the money in preparation for buying the crack that was in Elner, but as things stood, I probably didn't have the chance to buy it. At the very least, I wouldn't be able to buy it anytime soon. Things were going to heat up after the funeral. The last thing I'd be able to worry about is the crack. How annoying. That deviated from my plans a little, but it wasn't like I could do anything about it. I had too many things to worry about. The gate is ready. You may enter. Hearing the worker's voice, I turned my attention back towards the gate and stepped towards it. Let's handle the funeral first. I'll think of everything else later. And with that, my body faded into the portal. I made it just in time. The first thing I noticed as I stepped out of the portal was the weird atmosphere that lingered in the air. It was somber and gloomy. People walked around the streets with black clothing, and all appeared to be heading towards the royal palace. I followed behind the crowd before stopping at the gates of the palace. A lot of people were waiting outside, but only a select few were given direct access to the garden. Thankfully, I was one such person as I pushed my way through and entered the gates. I wonder how Aoife is doing. Entering the gates, it felt as though I could finally breathe again. There were a lot fewer people present. However, looking around, I could tell that everyone was an incredibly important person within the empire, many of whom I recognized. I don't see Aoife anywhere. It looks like she might come later. I scratched the side of my face. I could see Kira and Evelyn in the distance. They were both wearing black dresses, and they stood next to their parents. Looking around, I saw even more familiar figures. Primarily, those that I knew from the academy. But at the same time, I was shocked to see several people that I didn't think I'd see for a while. Keys, Kalian, and even Amael. What were they doing here? Wait, been a while. A hand tapped my shoulder and I paused. Turning back, a pair of gray eyes met my vision. Leon. Leon nodded, his face unusually serious. He wasn't different from the others. He wore all black, but at the same time, looking at him, he felt different. He felt more regal. I don't think I'll ever get used to this sight. To me, he was just my knight. I didn't think you'd show up here. Why wouldn't I? Leon looked at me in confusion, cutting me off. Although I'm now the prince of another empire, it doesn't change the fact that I was raised here. And, it's also not like I am heartless to the point where I wouldn't show up when something happened to one of my closest friends. Right, he was right. I looked around. I guess those from the other empires aren't here for the same reason, no. Nope. Leon shook his head. They're here to monitor the situation. Most of them are keeping an eye on the succession candidates. Some may have already chosen sides and started to sponsor them. This is the first time that the Nurs-Ansifa Empire has been so vulnerable. It's only natural that the other empires are setting their targets on the empire. You're right. The situation was extremely delicate. It was so delicate that I had no choice but to pick a side myself. If I don't pick a side and one of the candidates takes over, things can become rather troublesome for me. Let alone the inverted sky, who had likely already begun making moves to seize the throne. With the other empires now entering the fray, I knew this would be an exceptionally bloody and ruthless struggle. In order to protect my own interests, I had no choice but to join the battle. How troublesome. Just the thought made my headache worse. What about the Verdant Empire? I looked at Leon. Did they plan on interfering? I don't know. Leon shrugged. He continued before I could speak. We're already busy with our own internal matters. Even if I wanted to help, I don't have the ability or manpower to help. That being said, if the others from the Empire do plan on doing something, then I'll also try something. Naturally, we'll stand with Aoife. I see. That made a lot of sense. I was just about to say something else when, bang, the massive doors of the palace swung open, and several guards clad in gleaming silver armor stepped out. Their presence brought the surroundings to a still silence. The sheer pressure they exuded, combined with their radiant appearance, seemed to suffocate everyone nearby. The last thing I heard before they walked out was Leon's voice. It's starting. Shortly after, the sharp clank of metal echoed through the air as the guards stepped forward, holding onto two large white coffins in their grasp. They moved in solemn silence, making their way toward the center of the vast garden, while the sun cast its harsh glare upon the white coffins from above. Following the guards from behind were several figures in black. Immediately, my gaze fell on a certain figure as she walked with her head hung low, her face covered by the black veil that rested above her head. She walked in silence, following the guards as they eventually stopped at the center of the garden, where everyone could see. Clank. Placing the coffins down, the guards each took their own position beside the coffins. Everyone stood in silence as they stared at the coffins. No one said a word. No one was allowed to say a word. At this very moment, the silence was meant as a sign of respect. Respect for the emperor and the prince. But the silence didn't last for long. Eventually, a man stepped forward. He was tall, and his features were quite handsome. He looked relatively young, and his piercing yellow eyes stood a stark contrast to his black hair. That's John P. Megrail, one of the most likely candidates for the throne. Leon whispered next to me. I nodded silently, already somewhat aware of this. However, I was confused about something. He's clearly not a person who comes from the main bloodline. How come he's giving a speech before Aoife? Or is it possible that she's supposed to be last? I wasn't necessarily aware of how the customs worked. Nonetheless, under the heat of the sun, I spent the next couple of hours listening to the speeches coming from all the delegates. After a certain point, I felt like dying. In all honesty, I cared nothing for the emperor or the prince. I had only met the emperor once, and the memories of that time weren't exactly the greatest. I only came here because I had to and because I wanted to check up on Aoife. How long is this supposed to last? Can I get out already? Looking to my left, my gaze met with Leon's, and with just one look, I could see that he was feeling the same. This had been dragging for far too long. I sighed, he sighed, and then, next up, Aoife K. Megrail will be giving a speech. It was finally Aoife's turn to speak, and my interest returned as I turned my head to see her walk up towards the coffins, tracing her hand over them as she turned her head towards our direction. Despite the black veil covering her face, for a brief moment, I felt her gaze wander over to me. It locked onto me for several seconds before turning away. But just subtly, I noticed a subtle twitch of her body the moment our eyes locked. It wasn't very noticeable, but I still picked up on it. Is something wrong? For whatever reason, it felt as though she was holding herself back. I was a little confused, but I didn't think too much of it. She then began her speech. Compared to the others, her speech was on the shorter side. Her tone was relatively monotone, and she kept her face hidden the entire time. In spite of this, no one judged or said anything. Everyone grieved differently. But at the same time, there was a noticeable and gradual shift in the atmosphere as she spoke. It was light at first, but it became more and more noticeable as her speech was slowly coming to a close. That is all. It only became glaring once her speech was over. It was so thick that even I struggled to ignore it. The smell. It was the smell of gunpowder. The faces of many subtly shifted, and tensions rose to an all-time high. It's starting. Leon's soft mumble reached my ears, causing me to hold my breath. The fight for the throne. It's starting. Chapter 720. Light 1. Hearing Leon's words, I pursed my lips. He didn't need to say it for me to understand. I could just feel it. Thank you all for being here today. The emperor and the prince will now be laid to rest within the palace grounds. A mourning period of 5 days will be observed, during which the public may come forward to pay their respects. As the announcement was made, the crowd behind began to stir, alongside the people present within the garden. Shortly after, all of the delegates and members of the Megrail family returned to the palace. Everyone traced their movements until they finally entered. The noise returned after that. It looks like it's finally over. Leon spoke, his voice no longer a whisper as I turned to look at him. I nodded. Yeah, it looks like it. The entire event had probably lasted more than 4 hours. It was really starting to bother me. If I do end up dying one day and they hold a funeral, I'll make sure to make it longer. Just the thought of bothering people even in death sounded quite fun. Leon's eyes narrowed. I raised my brow. What? If you do end up dying again, and for real this time, I'm not staying any longer than 10 minutes. What? That's me being generous. Leon cut me off. I frowned. Then, joke's on you, I don't want you at my funeral. How the hell did he know what I was going to say? No, this isn't strange. He's always been like this. I brushed my hair back and shook my head. Looking around, I pretended to be all serious. We probably shouldn't be joking around in such a tense and sad moment. You're probably right. Yeah, who were we kidding? Neither of us cared. We were only here for Aoife, and since she wasn't here, it didn't matter. Everyone else probably also didn't care. In fact, looking around and seeing several people laughing, this became pretty obvious. Two-faced. Everyone here is two-faced. It felt as though I was in a den of snakes. I was just about to point this out to Leon when I felt a sudden tap on my shoulder. Curious, I turned around to see a man dressed in a black butler uniform standing behind me. May I help you? This was the first time I had ever seen the man, so I was a little taken aback. However, seeing him smile kindly at me shortly after, I quickly recovered. It's nothing serious. I was just told to escort you within the palace. The young princess would like to have a word with you. Aoife. Yes. The butler smiled, and I looked at Leon. Just me. Correct. Yet again, I was taken aback. However, I still decided to agree to the request. I understand. I didn't think anything bad would happen even if I refused it. However, I did come here to check up on her, so this was good too. Please follow me. The butler began to escort me into the palace. I gave Leon one last look before following him into the palace. Leon didn't have much of a reaction, he just mumbled something like, "Tell me how she is later," before leaving and going to where those from his empire were. If I have to make a guess as to why she's inviting me into the palace, it must be because she wants to talk about the succession battle. She probably wants me to join her camp. This felt like the most logical reason why she'd call me. It was also why I wasn't nervous as I entered the palace and was led to the second floor, and towards a specific room. The butler and I stopped before a gigantic wooden door. Turning to face me, the butler smiled. "The princess is waiting for you inside." Noted. I reached for the handle and pushed open the large wooden door, revealing the interior of an expansive, lavishly decorated room. At its center stood a grand bed draped with flowing curtains, surrounded by an array of paintings, vibrant plants, and ornate decorations that gave the space a regal, almost sacred atmosphere. Despite all the decorations, what truly caught my attention were the massive windows, pouring in brilliant sunlight as the curtains swayed gently in the breeze. And amidst that golden glow, a certain figure slowly came into view. She stood by the window, her hands behind her back as she absent-mindedly stared at the window outside. Her face was still hidden by the dark cloak that draped over her face. "This is a nice place." I tried to make some small talk as the door behind me closed. But, silence. Aoife didn't speak. Instead, she just slowly turned her head in my direction. I felt a wave of awkwardness as I casually looked around the place. "I heard that you called for me. Is this because you want me to join your camp for the succession battle? If so, why?" Aoife's voice cut through mine, causing me to stop for a moment. Turning my full attention to Aoife, I paused. Something about her voice didn't feel quite right. It was cold, and it sounded different than the Aoife that I usually knew. "Is something the matter?" "Why?" Aoife repeated, and I felt a sudden sense of déjà vu. "Why what? Why did you lie to me?" "What?" I looked at Aoife in confusion. "Lie? What was she?" "Talk." Aoife suddenly tossed something in my direction, her gaze still directed away from me, and I looked down to see that it was a certain piece of paper. Although I was confused, I slowly picked up the paper and looked at it. It was in that exact moment that the face froze. "You never voted for me, didn't you? It was all a lie from the start. This isn't the first time that you've lied. You've lied about the fact that you were alive despite everyone thinking you were dead. You've lied about so much. Was my acting really that shit to you? Just how much of it all was not a lie? In fact, aren't you just a lie yourself? What? That's just ridiculous. Is it though? Aoife cut me off once again. She wasn't letting me have a single word. Am I really wrong? I opened my mouth, but found myself unable to speak at all. I thought about her words and realized. She wasn't wrong. None of her words were wrong. I was a liar. Almost everything about me was a lie. I see. Aoife smirked beneath her veil. It was just clear enough for me to see it as she slowly turned her attention towards me. Even you know that I'm right. All you do is lie. You lie about the vote. You lie about your death. And, you lie about the fact that you're Julian. Exclamation mark quote. I felt the breath leave my body then. That's what you didn't think I'd know. Aoife slowly pulled the veil away from her face as she finally looked at me. The moment I caught sight of her face, my face and body tensed. Something about her didn't feel right. Her face, her expression, everything. I felt my back starting to tingle as I looked at her. I've always known. I'm sure the others are also aware. Maybe Leon was aware of it from the start. Evelyn for sure knows. I also knew. I just kept quiet about it. Not so much because you voted for me, but because I trusted you. I trusted what I saw. Aoife's voice grew colder as she looked at me. Her eyes started to change. They felt colder. They felt more detached. But the key word here is trusted. Aoife paused, her breathing growing softer. I no longer trust you. How can I trust you when all that you are is a lie? I remained silent. There wasn't much that I could say. She was right. I had indeed lied to her. About a lot of things. In fact, I was still lying to her. Nothing about who I was and what I stood for was the truth. I was nothing but a walking lie. And yet, staring at the paper before me, I managed to find my words again. You're really naive, aren't you? Question mark quote. Aoife paused, her gaze turning dangerous. I ignored it and just stared at the paper before looking back at her. I've always known that you were naive, but I didn't think you'd be this naive. The temperature of the room rose. But yet again, I ignored it. Regardless of what was happening to Aoife, she was still Aoife in my eyes. A naive yet try-hard princess. I appreciated her for how she always tried so hard in things that she wasn't very talented at. I appreciated her for how she always tried her best at anything that was put her way. I appreciated her for how naive she was. Do you seriously think that one vote makes sense to you? I looked at her. Her brows twitched. She probably knew, but chose to ignore it. I pointed at the paper. One vote. Of all the possible votes that you could have gotten, you only got one vote. I pointed at the paper again before looking at her. You, the princess of an empire, admired by countless, praised for your beauty, someone who could mesmerize an entire crowd, and you only received a single vote. I laughed then. Aoife's brows twitched further, and the coldness in her eyes receded subtly. I could tell that she was starting to understand. But I didn't stop. Do you want to know what really happened? Aoife remained quiet. However, I could tell from her expression that she was already aware of the answer. Your brother made it so that the voting was rigged. He made it so that he was the only one who voted for you. He wanted to be the only one who would vote for you. He probably was long aware of the fact that you weren't going to. Stop. Aoife's voice cut through mine. It was trembling slightly. It also no longer held the same coldness that it had held before. Whatever had previously taken over her mind was starting to fade. But I still wasn't done. I never cared to bring it up before, mostly because I was content with my own award. But the truth is, you getting just one vote never made any sense. And I know you knew it too. Still, you kept repeating it to yourself, insisting that it was just one vote. You're always like this. Despite being so confident on the outside, you hold little to no confidence in you. I said stop. Aoife's voice rose. She was practically shouting now as she looked at me. You're right. You're right. She brought her fist to her mouth and bit it. You're right. I'm just taking it out on you, all right. I knew from the start that something about it was off. No. I stopped Aoife before she could finish her words. Feeling her gaze wander back to me, I closed my eyes and sighed. You weren't wrong to get mad at me. I opened my eyes again and looked at hers. I never voted for you. I had indeed lied to you back then.